Maddox Cray's weathered hands trembled as he raised the last of his silver coins above his head, the metal catching moonlight in the dusty auction square of Millhaven Creek. $50? He hollered, his voice cracking like dry timber. Crowd fell silent, their oil lamps casting dancing shadows across weathered faces as they witnessed something unprecedented. Drifter bidding on a woman's debt. Cordelia Wynne stood on the wooden platform, her emerald dress torn at the hem, auburn, hair falling in wild waves around her shoulders. She'd been beautiful once, before her father's gambling debts consumed everything, before the bank claimed their homestead, before she became chattel to be sold to the highest bidder. Her green eyes locked with his across the crowd, and something electric passed between them, recognition of shared desperation perhaps, or the spark of something deeper. "Going once," called Barnabas Fletcher, the town's greedy auctioneer, his gold teeth glinting. He'd expected the banker's son, or perhaps old widow Hartwell's nephew, to claim this prize. Not this dust-covered stranger with his battered hat and scarred knuckles. Maddox had arrived in Millhaven Creek 3 days prior. His horse lame, his pockets nearly empty, carrying nothing but a tattered map to his deceased brother's claimed land somewhere in the territories. He'd planned to rest, earn a few coins, then continue west. But watching Cordelia's proud chin lift against her circumstances, seeing the fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished by shame, it stirred something in his chest he'd thought long dead. Going twice. The banker's son, Horatio Grimm, stepped forward with his oiled mustache and pressed suit. $60, he announced smugly. Knowing full well the drifter couldn't match it, Maddox felt the eyes of the crowd boring into him. In his saddlebags lay his brother's watch, the only thing of value he owned, besides his horse and gun. His brother Jonas had died of fever to winters past, alone in some forgotten mining camp. But not before writing that final letter about land and hope and second chances. Without hesitation, Maddox pulled the gold timepiece from his vest. "This here watch," he called out, his voice steady now. "It's belonged to my brother Jonas Cray. It's worth more than any man in this square carries in his purse." Fletcher examined the watch, his eyes widening at the inscription and the quality of the craftsmanship. "I'll allow it," he declared. "Final bid stands at, well, this timepiece and $50. Horatio's face reddened, but his father's purse strings were tight, and he knew better than to exceed his allowance on a whim. Sold. Fletcher's gavel came down with finality. As the crowd dispersed, whispering and shaking their heads at the evening's strange turn, Maddox approached the platform. Cordelia remained motionless, her hands folded, watching him climb the wooden steps with measured caution. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with premature gray. "I reckon we should talk." She studied his face. Lines carved by sun and hardship, the honest brown eyes that held no trace of the hunger she'd expected. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you spend everything for a stranger's debt?" Maddox replaced his hat and extended his hand. "Because everyone deserves a choice, Miss Wynne. And because I could see in your eyes that you ain't finished fighting yet." Cordelia stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before stepping down from the platform without taking it. "Won't be anyone's property, Mr. Cray," she said, her voice carrying the steel that had kept her standing through months of humiliation. "If you think that auction made you my master, you're mistaken." Maddox lowered his hand, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Good, I was hoping you'd say something like that." He gestured toward the flickering lights of the town's single boarding house. "There's a room at Murphy's place, clean bed, door that locks from the inside. It's yours for as long as you need it. And what do you expect in return?" Suspicion laced her words as they walked down the dusty main street, past shuttered shops and curious faces peering from windows. "Nothing," Maddox said simply. "Though I could use help with something, if you're willing to hear it." They reached Murphy's boarding house, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but still stood proud against the prairie wind. Inside, Seamus Murphy, a portly Irishman with kind eyes, handed over a room key without question after Maddox placed 2 silver coins on the scarred wooden counter. "Room's at the top of the stairs," Murphy said to Cordelia, then fixed Maddox with a meaningful look. "I run a respectable establishment, stranger." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Maddox replied. Upstairs in the cramped but clean room. Cordelia sat on the edge of the narrow bed while Maddox remained standing by the door, hat in hand. The space felt charged with unspoken possibilities and careful boundaries. My brother Jonas claimed land about 40 miles northeast of here. Maddox began, pulling the folded letter from his coat pocket. According to his last letter, there's a cabin, a well, and some cleared fields. Problem is, I've never seen it, and the territory office says a claim needs to be worked by 2 people to stay valid. Cordelia unfolded the letter, her educated fingers remnants of better days when her family could afford tutoring scanning Jonas's rough handwriting. You want me to come with you to help you work this land? I want to offer you a partnership, Maddox corrected. Half the land, half the work, half the profits, if we can make it prosper. And when you're ready to move on, if you ever are, your half would be yours to sell or keep. She looked up from the letter, searching his face. You don't know me? I could be lazy or mean-spirited or completely useless at farm work. Could be, Maddox agreed. But I watched you these past 3 days, Miss Wynne. Watched how you helped old Mrs. Chen with her washing even when she couldn't pay you. Watched how you shared your meager meals with that stray dog outside the general store. Watched how you held your head high even when those church ladies whispered their poison about your circumstances. A flush crept up Cordelia's neck. She hadn't realized anyone was paying such close attention to her small acts of kindness during those desperate days. Besides, Maddox continued, I've been drifting for nigh on 8 years now. Living hand to mouth, sleeping under stars more often than not. I'm tired of running from ghosts and chasing horizons that never get any closer. Maybe it's time to plant something that might grow. Outside, the night sounds of Millhaven Creek settled around them, a dog barking in the distance, the creak of settling timber, the whisper of wind through prairie grass. Cordelia folded the letter carefully and handed it back. I'll need supplies, she said finally. And I want your word that if this arrangement doesn't suit either of us, we part ways. As partners, not as master and servant. Maddox extended his hand again, and this time she took it. Ouch. Her grip was firm, calloused from recent hard labor, but still feminine. Partners, he agreed. Partners, she echoed, and for the first time in months, something that might have been hope flickered behind her green eyes. Dawn broke gray and cold over Millhaven Creek as Maddox loaded supplies onto a sturdy wagon he'd purchased with his remaining coins and the sale of his lame horse. Cordelia emerged from Murphy's boarding house, carrying a small cloth bundle, the sum total of her worldly possessions, and wearing a split riding skirt. She'd fashioned from her one decent dress. You sure about this, miss? Seamus Murphy asked. Genuine concern creasing his weathered features? That's wild country out there, and winter's coming on fast. I'm sure, Cordelia replied, though her stomach churned with uncertainty as she climbed onto the wagon seat beside Maddox. The morning air bit at her cheeks. Promising the harsh season ahead, they rode in companionable silence for the first few miles, the wagon wheels cutting deep ruts in the frost-hardened earth. Maddox handled the reins with easy competence, while his keen eyes scanned the horizon for landmarks from his brother's crude map. Tell me about Jonas, Cordelia said as they crested a hill, overlooking an endless sea of golden prairie grass. What kind of man was he? Maddox was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. He was the dreamer between us, always talking about tomorrow, about what we'd build, where we'd go. Our parents died of cholera when I was 16, and Jonas was 14. We looked after each other best we could, but ... double quotes. He shook his head. I was angry at the world, and that anger made me restless. Jonas wanted to settle, to make something lasting. We parted ways about 10 years back. Do you regret it? Every day, Maddox admitted. Last letter I got from him was full of plans. How he'd built a cabin by a creek, cleared 5 acres for planting, even dug a root cellar. Said he was finally ready to find a good woman and start a family. His hands tightened on the reins. Letter was dated 3 months before he died. Cordelia studied his profile, the strong jaw, the lines of sorrow carved around his eyes. What about you? Ever think about family? Once Maddox said simply, long time ago. They made camp that night beside a grove of cottonwood trees there. Leaves rustling like whispered secrets in the evening breeze. Maddox proved surprisingly domestic. Building a tidy fire and cooking salt pork and beans in a battered skillet, while Cordelia gathered dried grass for their bedrolls. I should tell you something, Cordelia said, as they shared their simple meal under a canopy of brilliant stars. My father wasn't just a gambler. He was also a drunk, and when he was drunk, he had a terrible temper. Maddox's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Did he hurt you? Sometimes. She pulled her shawl tighter against the night chill. But I learned to take care of myself. I can shoot if needed, and I'm not afraid of hard work or hard times. Good to know, Maddox said quietly. And Cordelia? Any man who'd raise his hand to a woman deserves whatever comes to him. Something warm unfurled in her chest at the protective edge in his voice. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to glowing embers. You can have the wagon, Maddox said, unrolling his bedroll near the dying fire. I'll sleep under the stars. We're partners, remember? Cordelia spread her own blanket on the opposite side of the fire. Equal shares of comfort and discomfort, she settled. Into her bedroll, she watched Maddox bank the coals and check their supplies one final time. His movements were economical, practiced the habits of a man who'd spent countless nights in the wilderness. But there was something protective in the way he positioned himself between her and the dark prairie, beyond their small circle of safety. Maddox? She called softly across the dying fire. Yeah, thank you for the choice. His voice came back warm through the darkness. Thank you for taking it. Cordelia closed her eyes and listened to the vast prairie night wind through grass, the distant cry of a nightbird, and the steady breathing of the man who'd given her back her freedom. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. On the third day, they found Jonas Cray's homestead. Cordelia's breath caught as they topped a low ridge and saw the valley spread below them. A natural bowl of prairie grass, bisected by a silver thread of creek, with a small log cabin nestled among a grove of oak trees. Even from a distance, she could see the neat lines of split rail fencing and the dark rectangles of cleared fields waiting for spring planting. My God, Maddox whispered, pulling the wagon to a halt. He really did it. They descended into the valley in reverent silence, both aware they were approaching something sacred, the crystallized dream of a man who died before he could fully live it. The cabin was solid, built from hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss. With a stone chimney that promised warmth in the bitter months ahead, Maddox pushed open the heavy wooden door, and they stepped into Jonas's last sanctuary. The interior was neat as a pin-a-stone hearth dominated one wall. A simple table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the single room, and a loft ladder led to what must be sleeping quarters above. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved goods, tools, and a few precious books. Cordelia ran her fingers along the smooth-worn surface of the table, imagining Jonas sitting here alone, planning his future by lamplight. He was waiting for someone, she said softly. Maddox's voice was thick with emotion as he examined his brother's carefully organized tools. He was always waiting for someone. They spent the afternoon exploring their new domain. The well Jonas had dug ran clear and cold. The root cellar was properly constructed and stocked with winter vegetables, and the small barn housed enough hay and grain to last until spring. Most remarkably, they found Jonas's journal tucked beneath his pillow in the loft pages and pages of meticulous notes about soil conditions, weather patterns, and his plans for expanding the homestead. Listen to this, Cordelia said, reading by lamplight as evening settled around them. Today I saw a pair of red hawks circling above the south field. I take it as a good sign hawks mate for life, and always return to the same territory. Perhaps. That's what I meant to do as well. Find my territory, find my mate. Build something that will last beyond my own brief time on this earth. Maddox sat silently whittling a piece of kindling, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Finally, he spoke. He deserved better than dying alone in some mining camp. Maybe, Cordelia said gently, but he didn't die alone. He left all this behind: his hopes, his dreams, his careful preparations. Now we're here to carry them forward. That night, they established the sleeping arrangements that would define their partnership. Maddox insisted Cordelia take the loft while he made his bed near the hearth below. It was proper, practical, and maintained the careful boundaries they'd established. But as Cordelia lay in Jonas's narrow bed, listening to Maddox's quiet movements below, she found herself wondering what it might be like to share more than just work and conversation. The thought startled her. She'd sworn off men after her father's cruelties and her brief, disastrous engagement to a banker's son who'd wanted her only for her family's former wealth. But Maddox was different. Steady where others had been volatile, generous where others had been grasping, protective without being possessive. Below, she heard him banking the fire and settling into his bedroll. "Cordelia?" His voice drifted up through the darkness. "Yes, we'll make this work. Whatever Jonas started here, we'll finish it." She smiled into the darkness, warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the banked coals below. "I believe we will," outside the prairie wind whispered. Through the oak trees, and somewhere in the distance, a pair of nightbirds called to each other across the vast darkness. Mates finding each other in the endless expanse of grass and sky. Winter arrived early and fierce, locking the valley in. A grip of ice and snow that tested every aspect of their partnership. But inside the cabin, warmth prevailed, not just from the crackling hearth, but from the easy rhythm they'd established as they worked side by side through the long, dark months. Cordelia proved herself invaluable in ways Maddox hadn't expected. She possessed a keen mind for figures and planning, organizing their supplies with military precision and rationing their resources to last until spring. Her needlework transformed their rough clothing into properly fitted garments, and she cooked meals that transformed their simple ingredients into something approaching luxury. Maddox, meanwhile, revealed depths that surprised them both. He read aloud from Jonas's books during the endless evening hours: Shakespeare, Dickens, and collections of poetry that he rendered in a voice rich with emotion. His hands, so competent with tools and weapons, proved equally skilled at carving. Small luxuries, a better hairbrush for Cordelia, decorative trim for their shelves, and a chess set they used for tournaments that lasted weeks. "Check," Cordelia announced one February evening, sliding her carved queen across the board with a triumphant smile. Maddox studied the position, his brow furrowed in concentration. Snow pelted the cabin's single window, and the wind howled like a living thing beyond their walls. "You've been letting me win, haven't you?" "Maybe the first few games," she admitted, tucking her feet beneath her in the chair across from him. "But you're learning fast." He moved his king to safety and fixed her with a penetrating look. "What else have you been letting me win?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond chess. Their partnership had deepened over the winter months into something more complex, shared glances that lingered too long, hands that brushed during simple tasks, conversations that revealed layers of longing neither dared address directly. "Nothing that matters," Cordelia said softly. But her green eyes told a different story. A sudden gust rattled the cabin walls, and the lamp flickered. In the dancing shadows, Maddox reached across the chessboard and covered her hand with his. "Cordelia, I need you to know something." "What?" "This winter. Sharing this space with you, building something together, ... It's been the happiest I've ever been." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "And that scares me more than any blizzard or failed crop ever could." She turned her hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. "Why does it scare you?" "'Cause I've lost everyone I ever cared about. My parents, Jonas even." He paused, old pain flickering across his features. "There was a woman once, before I started drifting. Her name was Catherine, and I loved her something fierce. But I was young and stupid and thought I had all the time in the world to make my fortune before I asked her to marry me, at a time. I came back to town with enough money to support a wife. She'd married the banker's son." Cordelia's heart clenched with sympathy, and something sharper jealousy for a woman she'd never met. "I'm sorry. Point is," Maddox continued, "I got used to leaving before anyone could leave me. It's easier to drift than to plant roots that might get torn up." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across their joined hands. Outside, the storm raged with primordial fury, but inside their small sanctuary, time seemed suspended. "I understand that fear," Cordelia whispered. "My father taught me early that people you depend on will always disappoint you. And my former fiancé, he made it clear that love could be withdrawn the moment you stopped being useful." But she met his eyes directly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But sitting here with you, sharing this life we've built together, it feels like maybe some risks are worth taking." Maddox lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Would you consider taking one more risk?" "What kind of risk?" Instead of answering with words, he rose from his chair and drew her gently to her feet. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, the chess game forgotten, the storm outside fading to background noise. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he cupped her face in his weathered hands. "The risk of believing this could be real," he murmured against her lips before kissing her with infinite tenderness. Cordelia melted into his embrace, her arms circling his neck as months of careful restraint dissolved like snow in spring sunshine. The kiss deepened, promising everything they'd been too afraid to speak aloud. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Maddox rested his forehead against hers. "Partners?" he asked, echoing their first agreement. "Partners," she confirmed. "In everything?" Spring transformed the valley into a paradise of wildflowers and new growth. But it also brought visitors and complications neither Maddox nor Cordelia had anticipated. They were working in the south field, planting the corn and beans Jonas had planned, when riders appeared on the ridge above. 3 men in dusty traveling clothes, their faces hard beneath the brims of their hats. Cordelia's blood chilled as she recognized the leader, Horatio Grimm, the banker's son who'd been outbid at the auction 6 months earlier. "Trouble, Maddox?" murmured, straightening from his work and moving protectively closer to Cordelia. Horatio and his companions rode down into the valley with the casual arrogance of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. They reined up near the split rail fence, and Horatio's oily smile made Cordelia's skin crawl. "Miss Wynne," he called out, touching his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. "You're looking well. Frontier life seems to agree with you." "Mr. Grimm," Cordelia replied coolly, "you're a long way from town." "Indeed I am." His eyes swept over their neat cabin, the flourishing fields, the obvious prosperity of their homestead. I've come to discuss a business proposition." Maddox stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. "The lady and I are partners in this land, Grimm. Any business you have, you can discuss with both of us." Horatio's smile turned predatory. "That's where you're wrong, Drifter. You see, I've done some research into your claim here. Turns out your brother Jonas never properly filed his homestead papers with the territorial office. This land is still open for claiming." Cordelia felt the blood drain from her face. They'd been so focused on working the land and building their relationship that they'd never verified Jonas's legal claim. "That's impossible," Maddox said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Jonas was careful about such things." "Was he?" Horatio dismounted, pulling a thick sheaf of papers from his saddlebags. "These are the official territorial records. No filing under the name Jonas Cray anywhere in this district." He spread the documents on the fence rail with theatrical flourish, which means this land is available to anyone with the proper documentation and filing fees. One of Horatio's companions, a lean man with dead eyes, spoke for the first time. "We filed our claim yesterday. Legal and proper." "God. You can't just steal someone's work," Cordelia protested, her voice shaking with fury. "I'm not stealing anything, my dear," Horatio replied smoothly. "I'm simply claiming abandoned property. However, I'm prepared to be generous." His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I'll offer you both employment on my new ranch. Maddox can work as a hired hand, and you, Miss Wynne, can return to town with me as my wife. Think of its respectability, security, a proper home instead of this primitive arrangement. The words hit like physical blows. Cordelia saw. Maddox's hands clench into fists. Watched the dangerous stillness that preceded violence settle over his frame. "The lady already has a proper arrangement," Maddox said, his voice deadly quiet. "With a drifter who paid for her like a piece of livestock?" Horatio laughed. "Come now, Miss Wynne. Surely you can see this partnership was never meant to last." Before anyone could react, Cordelia stepped forward and delivered a ringing slap across Horatio's face that echoed across the valley. "How dare you?" she snarled. "This man offered me choice when you and your kind saw me only as property. He's worked beside me, built something real with me, treated me as an equal partner in every sense of the word." Horatio's face flushed red, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. But Maddox was already there, his own weapon drawn and aimed with practiced precision. "I wouldn't," Maddox advised calmly. "Now you've said your piece, Grim. Time for you to leave." "This isn't over," Horatio snarled, remounting his horse with wounded dignity. "I have the law on my side." "Maybe," Maddox acknowledged. "Right. Now, you're trespassing on my land, threatening my woman, and wearing out your welcome real fast." As the three riders retreated up the ridge, Cordelia sagged against the fence rail, the full implications of their situation crushing down upon her. "We'll fight this," Maddox said fiercely, holstering his gun and pulling her into his arms. "There has to be some record of Jonas's claim." Cordelia looked up at his determined face and felt her heart break a little. They both knew Horatio was right about one thing. Without proper documentation, their legal claim to the homestead was tenuous at best. "What if we lose everything?" Maddox cupped her face in his hands, his brown eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll start over somewhere else, together. But I'll be damned if I let that snake take what Jonas built, what we've built, without a fight." The resolution came from an unexpected source: Jonas's own meticulous record-keeping and the loyalty of an old friend. 3 days after Horatio's ultimatum, another visitor rode into their valley. This one, however, brought hope instead of threats. Ezekiel Morrison was a grizzled former Army scout who'd known both Cray brothers in their younger days. He dismounted from his weathered horse with the careful movements of a man who'd lived hard and survived longer than most expected. "Maddox Cray," he called out, his voice carrying across the homestead. "Heard you might be having some legal troubles?" They welcomed Ezekiel into their cabin, where he warmed himself by the fire and accepted Cordelia's offer of coffee and cornbread. His news changed everything. "Ran into Jonas about 2 years back down in Santa Fe," Ezekiel explained, pulling a leather portfolio from his saddlebags. He was all excited about this homestead, kept talking about proper documentation and legal claims. "Smart man. Your brother had me witness and notarize his homestead application before he filed it." Maddox's hands shook as he examined the papers. Jonas had indeed filed properly, but with a territorial office in Santa Fe rather than the local district office, a legal technicality that made his claim valid, but invisible to Horatio's research. "There's more," Ezekiel continued. "Jonas asked me to hold copies of everything, just in case. Instead, he didn't trust bureaucrats not to lose important papers. He produced additional documents, surveyor's maps, water rights, even a deed transfer. That made Maddox the legal heir to the property." Cordelia felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as the full implications sank in. They weren't squatters or claim jumpers. They were the rightful owners of this land, this home, this life. They'd built together. The confrontation with Horatio 3 days later was swift and decisive. He arrived with a larger party this time, his 2 original companions, plus a territorial marshal and several hired guns, clearly expecting to evict the illegal occupants by force if necessary. Instead, he found Maddox and Cordelia waiting calmly. On their front porch, the legal documents spread out on a small table between them. Ezekiel sat in a rocking chair nearby, his rifle across his knees, looking every inch the dangerous old scout he'd once been. "Marshal Patterson," Maddox greeted. The lawman respectfully, "Thank you for coming. You have the documentation you requested." The marshal, a firm-minded man who'd ridden 2 days to sort out the conflicting claims, examined Jonas's papers with professional thoroughness. His expression grew increasingly grave as he compared them to Horatio's rushed filing. "Mr. Grimm, The marshal finally announced, "It appears your claim is invalid. This land was properly filed and claimed by Jonas Cray over 2 years ago. With all appropriate fees paid and documents recorded in Santa Fe, the property has passed legally to his brother upon his death." Horatio's face went through several interesting color changes. "That's impossible." "You researched the local office only," the marshal interrupted. "Should have checked Santa Fe. That's where territorial claims get filed for this." He rolled up the papers and handed them back to Maddox. "Your homestead is secure, Mr. Cray. Mr. Grimm, I suggest you and your men ride back to town before I decide to investigate how you came by some of those survey maps in your possession." As the defeated party rode away, Cordelia finally allowed herself to believe in their future. But Maddox had one more surprise waiting that evening. As they sat on their porch watching the sun set over their valley, he pulled a small carved wooden box from his pocket. "I've been working on this all winter," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring, his mother's wedding band, which he'd carried for years without knowing why. "Cordelia Wynne, we started as partners in land and work. But somewhere along the way we became partners in something much deeper." She looked at the ring, then at his beloved face, her heart full to overflowing. "I know I'm just a drifter who got lucky," Maddox continued, "but I'm hoping you'll consider making this partnership permanent. Will you marry me?" "You're not just a drifter anymore," Cordelia whispered, taking his hands in hers. "You're home. We're home. And yes, Maddox Crayas, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Around them, their valley settled into peaceful evening sounds, cattle lowing in the pasture, the creek murmuring over stones, night birds calling to their mates across the prairie. 6 months later, they were married by a traveling preacher under the oak trees where Jonas had first built his cabin. Ezekiel gave the bride away, and half the town of Millhaven Creek attended, including Seamus Murphy and even some of the church ladies who'd once whispered about Cordelia's circumstances. The drifter had paid his final bid and found his destination. She'd taken his hand and chosen to plant roots alongside him. Together, they built something lasting from the dreams of a dead brother and the courage to risk their hearts on an uncertain future. Their first child, a son they named Jonas, was born the following spring. He would grow up in the valley, rooted and loved, carrying forward the legacy of the uncle he'd never meet and the partnership that had transformed two wounded souls into a family. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were sleeping, Maddox and Cordelia would sit on their porch and remember that fateful auction night when a desperate drifter bid everything he had for a stranger's freedom and found his own salvation in return.